The desert wind howled through the skeletal remains of dead cacti, carrying with it the taste of alkali dust and broken dreams. In the summer of 1887, the land surrounding Cane Bar Ranch stretched endlessly beneath a merciless sun. Its parched earth cracked like the skin of some ancient, dying beast. Here, where the civilized world ended and hell began, stood the empire of Silas Kane. The ranch house rose from the desert floor like a fortress, its thick adobe walls defying both the elements and any fool brave enough to challenge its master. From his study window, Silas Kane surveyed his domain with eyes the color of winter steel. At 38, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by wind and hardship into something that might have been handsome, if not for the perpetual frost in his expression. The letter lay open on his mahogany desk, its delicate Eastern penmanship a stark contrast to the rough world outside. His Aunt Margaret, ever the meddler, had written from Boston with news of a suitable young woman in need of a situation, Eliza Monroe. She called her 23 years old, educated, of good family, fallen on unfortunate circumstances. Silas's jaw tightened. He needed no reminder of why he required a wife. The Kane name demanded an heir, and the empty rooms of this sprawling ranch house mocked him daily with their silence. His first wife, Sarah, had taken their daughter with her to the grave 5 winters past. Love had proven itself a luxury he could no longer afford. Boss, Jake Harlan, his foreman, knocked on the heavy oak door. Stage is coming in early. Dust cloud about 2 miles out. Silas folded the letter with deliberate precision. Have Maria prepare the guest room, and tell the men to mind their manners. We'll have a lady present. Jake's weathered face showed surprise, a rare occurrence. In the 3 years since Sarah's death, no woman had set foot in the main house save for Maria, the Mexican cook who came in daily from the workers' quarters. Yes, sir. Should I have someone meet the stage? I'll go myself. Silas reached for his black Stetson. Time to see what Aunt Margaret's Christian charity has sent us. The ride to Perdition's single dusty street took 20 minutes. The town, if one could call it that, consisted of a general store, a saloon, a chapel that doubled as a schoolhouse, and a scattering of sun-bleached buildings that seemed to apologize for their existence. People watched from doorways and windows as Silas passed. None greeted him. Fear and respect had that effect. The stagecoach arrived in a cloud of dust and profanity, the driver cursing his team with the creativity of a man who'd spent too many years fighting bad roads and worse weather. Silas dismounted, his spurs ringing against the wooden sidewalk as he approached. The door opened, and for a moment, he forgot the heat. Eliza Monroe emerged like a vision from another world. Her traveling dress, though dusty from the journey, spoke of Eastern refinement. Deep blue wool with ivory buttons, fitted perfectly to a figure that managed to be both delicate and somehow resilient. Auburn hair, pinned beneath a modest hat, caught the afternoon light like burnished copper. But it was her eyes that held him, green as sage after rain, with depths that seemed to hold secrets. She paused on the coach step, those remarkable eyes meeting his without the immediate lowering he'd expected from a woman in reduced circumstances. There was something there, some flicker of emotion he couldn't quite name before she composed her features into polite neutrality. Mr. Kane. Her voice carried a slight southern lilt, softened by education. I am Eliza Monroe. Your aunt was kind enough to arrange. I know why you're here. He offered his hand to help her down, noting the brief hesitation before her gloved fingers touched his. Welcome to Cane Bar Ranch, Miss Monroe. Thank you. She descended with practiced grace, despite the awkward height of the coach step. I hope my arrival hasn't inconvenienced you. Your aunt assured me the timing was agreeable. Silas signaled for her trunk. Margaret rarely concerns herself with what's agreeable to others, but you're here now. The ride back to the ranch passed in near silence. Eliza sat beside him on the wagon seat, her back straight despite what must have been days of uncomfortable travel. She asked no foolish questions about the landscape or the heat, made no empty chatter about her journey. He found himself stealing glances at her profile, noting the determined set of her chin, the way her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the jolting ride. "The ranch is isolated," he said finally. "Nearest neighbor is 15 miles. Town's where we came from. Not much society for a woman accustomed to Eastern ways. I'm adaptable, Mr. Kane." Something in her tone suggested that adaptability had been hard won. "Your aunt explained the nature of this arrangement. I have no illusions about trading Boston society for frontier hospitality." He studied her more openly then. "And yet you came. We all have our reasons for the choices we make." Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "I assume you have yours for accepting your aunt's suggestion." "I need a wife." The blunt statement hung between them like a challenge. "Not for sentiment or companionship. The Kane legacy requires an heir. My ranch requires a mistress who won't faint at the sight of blood or flee at the first sandstorm. Can you be that woman, Miss Monroe?" She turned to face him fully then, and again he caught that flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I can be whatever this life requires me to be, Mr. Kane. The question is whether you can accept what that might mean." The ranch house came into view before he could pursue that cryptic response. Maria waited on the veranda, her round face carefully neutral. The Mexican woman had served the Kane family for 20 years and knew better than to show surprise at her employer's sudden acquisition of a bride. "Maria, this is Miss Monroe. She'll be staying." Silas helped Eliza down from the wagon. "Show her to the blue room. We'll discuss permanent arrangements after she's settled." Eliza followed the older woman inside, pausing at the threshold to look back. "When shall we marry, Mr. Kane?" The directness startled him. "Saturday, 3 days hence. That should give you time to recover from your journey." "Of course." She inclined her head slightly. "A practical timeline for a practical arrangement." As she disappeared into the cool darkness of the house, Silas found himself unsettled in a way he hadn't been since Sarah's death. Something about Eliza Monroe didn't align with the image of a desperate woman fleeing diminished circumstances. The way she'd met his eyes, the careful control in her voice, the sense that she was evaluating him as much as he was evaluating her. It all suggested layers he hadn't expected. The wedding took place in the ranch's modest parlor, witnessed only by Judge Patterson from town, Maria, and Jake Harlan. Eliza wore a simple gray dress that somehow managed to make her look more beautiful than any wedding gown might have. She spoke her vows in that same controlled voice, her hand steady in his as he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. "You may kiss your bride," Patterson intoned, already reaching for the whiskey Silas had set out. Silas brushed his lips against Eliza's briefly, noting the slight tremor that ran through her at the contact. Her eyes, when he pulled back, held that unreadable quality that was already beginning to fascinate and frustrate him in equal measure. The wedding dinner was a quiet affair. Eliza sat at the opposite end of the long dining table, the distance between them feeling both appropriate and somehow wrong. She handled Maria's questioning looks with grace, complimenting the food and asking thoughtful questions about the running of the household. No one would have guessed she'd arrived only 3 days before. "I'll show you the ranch operations tomorrow," Silas said as Maria cleared the plates. "You'll need to understand how things work here. This isn't a gentleman's estate with tenant farmers and overseers. Every soul on Kane land earns their keep, from the lowliest vaquero to the mistress of the house. I expected nothing less." Eliza's fingers traced the stem of her water glass. "I'm stronger than I look. Mr. Kane." "Silas," he corrected. "We're married now, whatever the circumstances, and I'm beginning to believe you about that strength." Later, he showed her to her room, the large chamber adjoining his own, connected by a door that had remained locked since Sarah's death. "This is yours. Maria will help you settle your things properly tomorrow, if you need anything." "I'll manage." She stood in the doorway, lamplight casting shadows that made her seem both vulnerable and somehow dangerous. "Good night, Silas." He retreated to his own room, troubled by urges he'd thought buried with his first wife. Through the connecting door, He could hear the quiet sounds of Eliza preparing for bed, the rustle of fabric, soft footsteps on wooden floors, the creak of the bed frame. He poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and stood at his window, staring out at the darkness. In the distance, a coyote howled, its cry echoing across the empty land. The sound seemed to mock him, reminding him that for all his power and land and cattle, he was as alone as that solitary predator calling to the moon. He'd brought Eliza Monroe here to fill a role, to satisfy the demands of legacy and bloodline. But something in those green eyes warned him that he might have invited more than just a bride into his carefully controlled world. The desert night stretched endlessly before him, full of shadows and secrets. In her room, separated by a door and a universe of unspoken words, his new wife was learning the weight of the silence that would define their days. And somewhere in that silence, something waited, patient and inevitable as the desert sun. The weeks that followed stretched before Eliza like the endless desert horizon, each day bleeding into the next with monotonous precision. The Kane house, for all its size and solid construction, felt more like a beautiful prison than a home. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the pre-dawn breakfast for the hands, the afternoon heat that drove even the lizards to shade, the evening return of men coated in dust and sweat, and the honest exhaustion of hard labor. Silas maintained a careful distance, speaking to her only when necessity demanded. Their meals together were exercises in silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and Maria's quiet movements as she served. He slept in his own room, the connecting door between them remaining locked, though sometimes Eliza stood before it in the deep of night, her hand hovering over the wood, wondering what would happen if she knocked. On this particular morning, she stood at the parlor window, watching dust devils dance across the scorched earth. The grandfather clock behind her ticked away the seconds of her confinement, its steady rhythm a mockery of the life she'd imagined when she'd agreed to this arrangement. "Senora!" Maria appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes sympathetic. "Would you like me to prepare tea?" "No, thank you, Maria." Eliza managed a wan smile. "Though perhaps you could tell me, is there nowhere green in this place? No spot where something grows besides thorns and bitter brush?" The older woman hesitated. "Then, there is the spring, Senora, hidden in the small canyon to the west. But Don Silas, he does not like—" "What doesn't Mr. Kane like?" Eliza turned from the window, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "The women to ride alone. It is not safe." "Of course. Another rule. Another boundary." Eliza pressed her fingers to her temples, fighting the headache that had become her constant companion. "I see. And I suppose asking for an escort would be—" "The men are busy with the cattle. Senora, always busy." That afternoon, defiance finally overcame caution. Eliza slipped into the split riding skirt she'd brought from the east and made her way to the stables. The barn was cooler than the house, filled with the comforting scents of hay and horse and leather. She was examining a gentle-looking mare when footsteps made her freeze. "Help you with something, ma'am?" She turned to find a man watching her from the shadows, tall, lean, with sand-colored hair and eyes the blue of a deeper sky than this desert ever saw. Something about his face struck her as familiar, though she couldn't place it. "I was hoping to ride," she said, lifting her chin. "This mare seems calm enough." "That's Buttercup. She's a good choice for a lady." He stepped forward, and the late afternoon light from the barn door illuminated his features fully. "Though I reckon Mr. Kane might have something to say about his wife riding out alone." "Mr. Kane has many opinions about what his wife should and shouldn't do." The words came out sharper than intended. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Eliza Kane." "Jesse Colton, ma'am." He touched his hat brim. "I work the horses mostly, help with breaking the new stock." Colton. The name tugged at something in her memory, but before she could pursue it, he was already saddling the mare with practiced efficiency. "Tell you what, Mrs. Kane, I was heading out to check the remuda anyway. Wouldn't be any trouble to show you that spring Maria probably mentioned." She should have refused. Should have remembered her place, her purpose, the careful game she was playing. Instead, she heard herself saying, "That would be kind of you, Mr. Colton." They rode in companionable silence at first, following a trail that wound between towering red rocks. Jessie kept a respectful distance, but Eliza was aware of him watching her, assessing her horsemanship with professional interest. "You ride well for an Eastern lady," he observed as they navigated a narrow passage. "My father believed all his children should know horses." The words slipped out before she could stop them, bringing with them a wave of memories she'd tried to bury. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was—" She urged Buttercup forward, ending the conversation before it could venture into dangerous territory. The spring, when they reached it, took her breath away. Hidden in a box canyon, protected by overhanging cottonwoods, the small pool reflected the sky like a piece of heaven fallen to earth. Green grass grew along its banks, impossibly lush in this dried land. "It's beautiful," she breathed, dismounting to kneel by the water's edge, one of the few pretty spots left on the range. Jessie remained mounted, scanning the canyon walls with the vigilance of a man who'd learned not to relax. "Used to be more water here before things changed." Eliza cupped the cool water in her hands, letting it run through her fingers. "How long have you worked for Mr. Kane?" "Coming up on 6 months now." Something in his tone made her look up. "Though I knew of him long before that. Most folks in these parts have opinions about Silas Kane. And what's yours?" Jessie's blue eyes met hers directly. "I think he's a man who takes what he wants and doesn't much care who gets hurt in the process. But then, you probably already figured that out." The ride back was tense with unspoken words. As they neared the ranch, Jessie finally said, "I'll be heading to town tomorrow for supplies. If you needed anything, letters posted. Perhaps I'd be happy to oblige." Eliza's hands tightened on the reins. "That's kind of you, but I have no one to write to." "No one at all?" His voice was carefully neutral. "That seems mighty lonely for a young woman far from home. We all make our choices. Mr. Colton." That evening, Silas appeared for dinner earlier than usual, his expression unreadable as he took his seat. Eliza had changed into a simple green dinner dress, her hair pinned up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. "Jake tells me you went riding today," he said without preamble. "I did." She met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Colton was kind enough to escort me to the spring. Maria had mentioned it, and I was curious." "Jessie Colton." Silas spoke the name like it tasted bitter. "In future, if you wish to ride, inform me. I'll arrange a proper escort." "Am I a prisoner here, then?" The question hung between them like a blade. Silas set down his fork with deliberate control. "You're my wife. Your safety is my responsibility. Your possession, you mean, if that's how you choose to see it." His gray eyes had gone cold as winter steel. "You knew what this was when you agreed to it." "Yes," she said quietly. "I knew." Later, alone in her room, Eliza sat at the small writing desk and stared at a blank sheet of paper. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, and outside, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the yip of coyotes. She thought of Jessie's familiar, unfamiliar face, of the careful way he'd said Silas's name. She thought of the spring, that impossible oasis of green in this burned land, and wondered what had changed to make the water run low. Most of all, she thought of the locked door between her room and Silas's, and the way his eyes had softened for just a moment when she'd asked if she was a prisoner. There had been something there, pain, perhaps, or loneliness that matched her own. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Maria. But it was Silas who entered, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen. He carried a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth with age. "I thought—" He stopped, started again. "These were my mother's. Sarah never cared for them, but perhaps you might find use for them." He set the box on her desk and opened it to reveal a collection of books, their leather bindings cracked but intact. Poetry. She saw Tennyson, Browning, even some Whitman. Thank you, she managed, genuinely touched. This is unexpected. You asked if you were a prisoner. He stood awkwardly by the desk, too large for the feminine space. You're not, but this land is hard. Eliza, it takes things from people. Their hopes, their softness, sometimes their lives. I've already buried one wife. I won't bury another because she didn't understand the dangers. She looked up at him, seeing for the first time the weight he carried. What happened to her? To Sarah? His face closed off immediately. Fever took her and the baby. 3 days from first symptom to grave. Nothing I could do. No doctor closer than 100 miles. I'm sorry. Are you? The question seemed to surprise them both. You don't know me, Eliza. Don't know what kind of man you've bound yourself to. Maybe that's for the best. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Have you ever loved anything? He paused at the door, his back to her. Once. It didn't end well. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the books and the dancing shadows and the terrible ache of understanding more than she'd expected to. That night, she dreamed of water, springs running dry, rivers changing course, and somewhere in the distance, her father's voice calling her name. But when she woke, there was only the desert wind and the ticking clock and the weight of secrets pressing against her heart like stones. The theft happened on a moonless night when the desert held its breath. Eliza woke to the sound of gunfire and men shouting, the peaceful darkness shattered by chaos. Through her window, she could see torches moving like fireflies among the cattle pens, hear the thunder of hooves as the herd scattered. She threw a shawl over her nightgown and rushed to the hallway, nearly colliding with Silas as he emerged from his room, strapping on his gun belt. His face was granite in the lamplight, eyes blazing with a fury that made her step back. Stay inside, he commanded, already moving toward the stairs. No matter what you hear. But she followed anyway, drawn by a mixture of fear and fascination. From the front porch, she watched him transform from the cold, controlled man she'd married into something primal and dangerous. He barked orders to his men, his voice carrying over the confusion with absolute authority. Jake, take 5 men and cut around Devil's Rock. Miguel, you and the boys head them off at the wash. I want every last head back, and I want the bastards who took them. The vaqueros scattered like a well-trained army, leaving dust and echoes in their wake. Silas stood on the porch, rigid with rage. His hands clenched so tight his knuckles showed white in the darkness. I told you to stay inside. He didn't turn to look at her. How many did they take? 40 head, maybe 50. His voice was low, dangerous. Someone knew exactly where to hit, exactly when the night guards would be changing shifts. The implication hung between them. An inside job. Someone on the ranch had betrayed him. You think one of your men. He whirled on her then, and she saw something wild in his eyes, something that reminded her of a wounded wolf. What do you know about it? Nothing. You only what? You've been here 2 months, asking questions, riding around with the hands. He advanced on her, and she found herself backing against the porch rail. Maybe my aunt sent me more than just a wife. Maybe she sent me a spy. The accusation hit her like a physical blow, all the more painful because it held a grain of truth, though not the one he suspected. You're upset. You don't mean... Don't tell me what I mean. But the wildness was already fading from his eyes, replaced by something like shame. He turned away, gripping the porch rail. Forgive me, when someone threatens what's mine, I become... A beast? The word slipped out before she could stop it. To her surprise, he laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. Yes, exactly that. The beast of Cane Ranch. That's what they call me in town, isn't it? She wanted to deny it, but couldn't. She had heard the whispers, the stories, how Silas Kane had built his empire on the bones of those who'd opposed him, how his first wife had tried to run away before the fever took her, how he'd once hanged 3 men from the big cottonwood for rustling, without benefit of judge or jury. Is that what you think of me? His voice had gone quiet. That I'm a monster? I think, she said carefully, that you're a man who's forgotten how to be anything but hard. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his features. And what would you have me be? Eliza? Soft? Gentle? This land would eat me alive. There's strength in gentleness, too. She thought of her father, who'd been both powerful and kind before everything fell apart. Being hard doesn't always mean being strong. The sound of returning horses interrupted whatever he might have said. Jake Harlan rode up, his face grim in the torchlight. We caught 2 of them. Boss, the others got away with about 30 head. Who? The single word cracked like a whip. Tom Garrett and that new fellow, Parsons. They're hurt pretty bad. Miguel winged them both. Silas's expression went cold again. Bring them to the barn. Wake the other hands. Everyone needs to see this. Silas, Eliza started, but he was already striding away. What followed was a lesson in frontier justice that left her shaken. The 2 rustlers, both bleeding from gunshot wounds, were dragged into the barn and tied to posts. Silas interrogated them with a ruthless efficiency that made her understand why men feared him. Who hired you? He stood before Tom Garrett, who'd worked the ranch for 3 years. This wasn't your idea. You haven't got the brains for it. Garrett spat blood. Go to hell. Cain. Silas nodded to Jake, who threw a bucket of water in the man's face. We can do this all night, Tom, but you're gut shot. You'll be dead by morning anyway. Make it easier on yourself. From her position by the barn door, Eliza watched the proceedings with a mixture of horror and unwilling fascination. This was the man she'd married. Judge, jury, and potentially executioner. Yet when young Parsons began to cry, begging for mercy, she saw something shift in Silas's face. How old are you, boy? 17, sir. Silas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, some of the rage had dimmed. Who hired you? I don't know his name. Parsons sobbed. Tom just said there was easy money in it, that someone wanted to hurt your operation. Said you had it coming, after what you'd done. After what? But Garrett, despite his wounds, laughed. You know what? Cain, all that water you stole, all them families you drove off, chickens coming home to roost. Silas went very still. I bought those water rights legal, every signature, every deed recorded proper. Legal don't make it right. Garrett's eyes found Eliza in the doorway. Ask your pretty wife what she thinks about a man who'd dam up a river to water his own cattle while his neighbors' crops die. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Silas turned slowly to look at her, and she saw the question in his eyes. Whose side was she on? Get the doctor, she said quietly. Whatever they've done, they don't deserve to die like animals. They're thieves. Jake protested. They're wounded men. She stepped into the barn, her nightgown trailing in the straw. If we become no better than beasts in dealing with beasts, then what's the point of civilization? Silas studied her for a long moment. Then, Jake, send someone for Doc Morrison, and post a guard. If they live, they'll stand trial in town. As the barn emptied, Eliza found herself alone with her husband. He stood with his back to her, shoulders tense with barely controlled emotion. You think me weak for sparing them? I think you remembered you're human. She moved closer, drawn despite herself. That's not weakness. He turned then, and she saw exhaustion beneath the hardness. I've worked 15 years to build this place, 15 years of fighting drought, Indians, rustlers, bankers, and now someone's trying to tear it down, piece by piece. The water rights Garrett mentioned are mine, bought and paid for, but something flickered in his eyes. The previous owners chose to sell rather than adapt. That's not my fault. She thought of Jesse's words at the spring, about how there used to be more water. Understanding began to dawn, bringing with it a cold weight in her stomach. But you knew what would happen when you dammed the river. You knew their crops would fail. This is cattle country, not farming land. His voice had gone flat. I offered to buy them out at fair prices. They chose to be stubborn. And your first wife? Was she stubborn too? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Silas's face went white, then flushed with anger. Don't speak of things you don't understand. Then help me understand. She reached out, almost touching his arm before pulling back. I see the way the men look at you, respect mixed with fear. I hear the stories in town. But when you gave me those books, when you spared those boys just now, I saw someone different. Which man did I marry? Silas, the beast, or the one who reads poetry? He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. Both, I suppose. The beast is what this land made me. The other... He shrugged. Maybe that's who I was before I learned the price of softness out here. Without thinking, she reached up to touch a cut on his cheek where a branch had caught him during the chase. He went still at the contact, his eyes closing briefly. You're hurt, she said softly. It's nothing. But he didn't pull away as she used her shawl to dab at the blood. They stood close in the lamplight, surrounded by the scent of hay and horses and violence, and she felt something shift between them, some wall beginning to crack. Eliza, he said, her name rough on his lips. You should know. Boss! Miguel burst into the barn. Riders coming! Maybe 10, 12 men! The moment shattered. Silas stepped back, his expression closing off. Get to the house. Lock the doors. This time she obeyed, but not before she saw him checking his pistol, saw the beast returning to his eyes. As she ran across the yard, she heard him calling orders, preparing for another fight, and she wondered if this was what her life would be. Moments of humanity drowning in an ocean of necessary hardness. In her room, she stood at the window watching torchlights gather like angry stars. Somewhere out there, her husband prepared to defend what was his with blood if necessary. And despite everything, despite the growing feelings she hadn't expected, despite the plan she'd come here to fulfill, she found herself praying for his safety. The locked door between their rooms had never felt more symbolic. On one side, a woman torn between duty and unexpected emotion. On the other, a man who'd forgotten how to be anything but alone. And outside, the desert waited with patient hunger for whatever dawn would bring. The riders turned out to be neighboring ranchers, come to offer help against the rustlers. But the tension of that night lingered in the house like smoke, seeping into every corner. For days afterward, Silas barely spoke to Eliza, his walls rebuilt higher than before. She felt the weight of unfinished conversations, of questions that hung between them like shadows. Then came the storm. It rolled in from the west on a Thursday evening, black clouds piling up against the mountains like a declaration of war. The air grew heavy, charged with electricity that made the horses restless and sent the ranch dogs slinking for cover. Eliza stood on the porch, watching lightning fork across the darkening sky. Going to be a bad one, Maria said, hurrying to secure the shutters. Maybe you should... Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it shook the windows. The first fat raindrops began to fall, and within minutes, the drought-broken earth was awash with water. Wind howled around the house corners, driving rain horizontal. Eliza helped Maria secure the house, checking windows, moving furniture away from potential leaks. Silas was out with the men, trying to move the cattle to higher ground before the arroyos flooded. Through the chaos of the storm, she could hear their shouts, see torches fighting to stay lit against the deluge. Near midnight, with the storm at its worst, she heard boots on the porch. Silas burst through the door, soaked to the skin, water streaming from his hat and coat. His face was drawn with exhaustion, a fresh cut on his forehead bleeding freely. The north pasture's flooding, he said to Maria. Wake the house staff. We'll need every hand. He started to turn away, but Eliza caught his arm. You're hurt. It's nothing. But he swayed slightly, and she saw how his left arm hung awkwardly. Sit. When he didn't move, she hardened her voice. Silas Kane, you'll do no one any good if you collapse. Sit down and let me look at that arm. Perhaps it was surprise at her tone, or perhaps exhaustion. But he sank into a kitchen chair. Up close, she could see the damage. his shirt torn and bloody where something had caught him, his shoulders sitting at an odd angle. "Dislocated," he said through gritted teeth. "Damn horse threw me when the lightning struck close." Eliza had seen her father deal with such injuries among their stable hands. "Maria, I need hot water and clean cloth, and whiskey." As Maria bustled away, Eliza helped Silas out of his sodden coat and shirt. His torso was a map of scars, some old and white, others newer. The sight made her heart contract with unexpected tenderness. How many times had he faced danger alone, patched himself up in silence? "This is going to hurt," she warned, positioning herself behind him. "Can't be worse than—" His words cut off in a grunt of pain as she manipulated the joint back into place with a solid pop. He sat rigid for a moment, breathing hard, then slowly relaxed. Where did an Eastern lady learn to do that? His voice was rough. "My father raised horses. Accidents happened." She began cleaning the cut on his forehead, trying not to think about how close she was to him, how warm his skin felt under her fingers. "You could have been killed out there. Wasn't the first time, won't be the last." "That's a comfort," she said dryly, making him chuckle, a sound she'd never heard from him before. The storm raged on, but inside the kitchen, a different kind of tension built. She was acutely aware of every point of contact as she worked, her fingers on his skin, his breath stirring her hair when she leaned close. When she finished binding his shoulder, neither of them moved. "Eliza," her name was barely a whisper, "I owe you an apology. The other night, when I accused you—" "You were protecting what's yours. I understand." He turned in the chair to look up at her, and she saw something raw in his eyes. "Do you? Do you understand what it's like to have everything you've built balanced on a knife's edge? To know that one moment of weakness, one wrong choice, and it all comes crashing down?" She thought of her own secrets, the weight of them pressing against her heart. "Yes, I think I do." Something shifted in his expression. He stood slowly, favoring his injured shoulder, and they were suddenly very close in the lamplight. The storm outside seemed to pause, holding its breath. "I dream about you," he said abruptly. "Every damn night since you arrived, I tell myself it's nothing, that you're just another responsibility, another piece of property to manage. But then you look at me like you're looking now, and I—" Thunder crashed overhead, and as if it had broken some spell, he pulled her against him. The kiss was nothing like their wedding day. This was hunger and need and 3 months of denied desire. Eliza's hands tangled in his wet hair, and she tasted rain and whiskey, and something essentially him. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw wonder in his eyes. "I swore I'd never— After Sarah— I'm not Sarah." The words came out fiercer than intended. "I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting. I'm your wife, Silas. You're equal, if you'd let me be." He studied her face as if seeing her for the first time. Then, without a word, he took her hand and led her through the dark house. At the connecting door between their rooms, that barrier that had stood locked for months, he produced a key. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hand on the doorknob. Instead of answering, she reached past him and turned the handle herself. What followed was a communion of souls as much as bodies. In the darkness lit by lightning flashes, they discovered each other with the desperation of the long denied. His hands, so capable of violence, were infinitely gentle as they mapped her skin. Her fingers traced his scars, each one a story of survival, while the storm outside echoed the tempest within. When he kissed the hollow of her throat, she arched beneath him, a soft sound escaping her lips. "Silas." "I'm here," he murmured against her skin. "I'm here." They moved together with increasing urgency, the barriers between them dissolving like salt in rain. When release finally claimed them, Eliza felt as if something inside her had shattered and reformed, fundamentally changed. Afterward, they lay entwined while the storm began to gentle outside. Silas's fingers combed through her unbound hair, and she felt his chest rise and fall beneath her cheek. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "How to be a husband, not just a man who owns things." "Then we'll learn together." She pressed a kiss to a scar near his heart. But no more locked doors. Silas, no more walls between us. He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, there are things about me, Eliza, things you don't know, dark things. She thought of Jessie, of the plan she'd come here to execute, of the letter hidden beneath her jewelry box. We all have shadows in our past. Perhaps it's time to let light into them. Morning came gray and washed clean, the storm having broken both the drought and something fundamental between them. Eliza woke to find Silas watching her, his expression soft in a way she'd never seen. "Good morning, Mrs. Kane," he said, and there was something new in how he said her name. Possession. Yes, but also wonder. "Good morning, Mr. Kane." She stretched against him, enjoying the way his eyes darkened. "I suppose you'll be needed outside. They can wait." He pulled her closer. "I've been alone in this bed for too long to rush away now." Later, when they finally emerged, Maria took one look at them and smiled, the first genuine smile Eliza had seen from her. The ranch hands, if they noticed any change, were too polite or too wise to comment. But there was a different energy in the house, as if the storm had washed away more than dust. That evening, as promised, Silas took her to the wildflower meadow he'd mentioned once before. The rain had brought them to life, a carpet of color where before there had been only brown earth. They sat on a blanket, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Eliza felt a dangerous warmth blooming in her chest. "My father built a house here once," Silas said unexpectedly. "Before the big house, just a little cabin, but he said this spot reminded him of home in Tennessee. After he died, I couldn't bear to maintain it, let it fall to ruin." "What happened to him?" "Comanche raid. I was 15, out with the herd. Came back to find—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "I rebuilt everything bigger, stronger, swore nothing would ever take what was mine again." Eliza took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars. "Is that when you started building walls?" "I suppose it was." He brought her hand to his lips. "Took a woman from Boston to start tearing them down." She wanted to tell him then, wanted to confess everything, who she really was, why she'd come, how tangled her feelings had become. But the words stuck in her throat. How could she destroy this fragile new thing between them? Instead, she leaned against his shoulder and watched the stars emerge one by one, while somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The sound no longer seemed lonely to her. It sounded like coming home, but even as her heart expanded with feelings she hadn't expected, her mind whispered warnings. Jessie was still out there, still watching. The plan still existed, waiting to be executed or abandoned. And Silas, for all his newfound tenderness, was still the man who destroyed her father. The meadow held them in its gentle embrace, beautiful and temporary as the wildflowers that would wither when the drought returned. And Eliza wondered if what bloomed between them would prove just as fragile when the truth finally came to light. The morning Jessie Colton disappeared, 3 prize bulls were found dead in the south pasture, their throats cut in a way that spoke of deliberate cruelty rather than predator attack. Silas stood over the carcasses, his face carved from stone, while his men shifted nervously around him. "This ain't rustling anymore," Jake Harlan said quietly. "This is war." Eliza watched from the house as riders scattered to search for Jessie, her stomach churning with dread. The past weeks had been a dream, she and Silas finding their way to each other, the walls between them crumbling night by night. But now reality crashed back with the force of a flash flood. That evening, an envelope appeared under her door while she dressed for dinner. Her hands trembled as she read the familiar handwriting. "Remember why you came here. Remember what he did to your father. The time for justice is now, or I'll take matters into my own hands. You know where to find me. Jay." She burned the letter immediately, but the words were seared into her mind. At dinner, she could barely meet Silas's eyes. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "The dead cattle. It's disturbing." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. I'll handle it. You don't need to worry about such things. But she did worry. She worried as she lay beside him that night, listening to his steady breathing. She worried as she watched him ride out each day, wondering if Jesse had him in his sights. Most of all, she worried about the war raging in her own heart. 3 days later, while Silas was in town meeting with the sheriff, Eliza saddled Buttercup and rode to the abandoned line shack near Devil's Rock. She knew Jesse would be there. It was where they'd agreed to meet if the plan went wrong. He was waiting, looking haggard and dangerous. The charming horse trainer was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. "You came," he said. "I was beginning to think Cain had worked his magic on you completely. How could you kill those animals? They were innocent." "Innocent?" Jesse's laugh was ugly. "Like your father was innocent when Cain destroyed him? Like my family was innocent when we lost everything?" "Your family?" The pieces suddenly clicked into place. "Colton. Dear God, you're Matthew Colton's son, his nephew." Jesse's blue eyes burned with old fury. "My uncle took me in after my parents died, gave me a home, a future, until Silas Cain decided he needed our water rights." Eliza sank onto a dusty crate, the weight of revelation crushing her. "That's why you sought me out. You knew who I was." "Elizabeth Monroe," he said, using her full name like an incantation. "Daughter of Charles Monroe, who signed away his water rights to Cain and then put a bullet in his brain rather than watch his family starve. You were away at school, weren't you? Didn't see him at the end, broken and hollow." "Stop." The word came out cracked. "I found you in Kansas City, watched you working in that dress shop, too proud to beg from your Eastern relatives. When I learned Cain was looking for a wife," he shrugged. "It seemed like Providence. You'd get close to him, find evidence of his crimes, and we'd destroy him legally, nice and clean. And if I couldn't find evidence," Jesse's hand moved to his gun, "then we'd handle it another way. I won't let you murder him." "Won't let me?" He stepped closer, and she smelled whiskey on his breath. "You've bedded him, haven't you? Forgotten all about your father's grave and taken up with his killer." The slap echoed in the small shack. Jesse touched his cheek, his expression darkening. "Careful, Eliza. I'm not one of Cain's tame cowboys. No, you're a coward who kills cattle in the night and hides behind a woman's skirts." She stood, chin raised. "I'm done with this. Done with you. Done with revenge. He destroyed your family, and I won't let him destroy what's left of my soul." She moved toward the door, but Jesse caught her arm. "You tell him about me, about our plan, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who misses. Cain really is. How do you think he'll react when he learns his precious wife came here to betray him?" She wrenched free. "Do what you must, but leave the ranch alone. No more dead animals, no more threats. If you have issue with Silas, face him like a man." "Like your father did," Jesse called after her. "Look how that ended." Eliza rode back to the ranch with tears streaming down her face. The burden of truth sat on her chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe. She loved Silas. God help her. She loved the man who'd driven her father to desperation. But that love was built on a foundation of lies, and she could feel it cracking beneath her feet. She found Silas in his study, going over ledgers. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening in that way that still made her heart skip. "You've been crying," he said, rising immediately. "What's wrong?" The confession stuck in her throat, looking at him, at the concern in his eyes. She couldn't do it, not yet. "I went riding. Sometimes the beauty of this place overwhelms me." He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and sage that had become home to her. "You're trembling. Hold me," she whispered. "Just hold me." That night, their lovemaking had a desperate edge. She touched him as if trying to memorize every plane and angle, kissed him as if it might be the last time. When he asked if something was wrong, she silenced him with her mouth, her body, pouring all her confused love and guilt into their joining. Later, as he slept, she slipped from bed and padded to his study. by lamplight. She searched through his papers, looking for something, she wasn't sure what, evidence of his crimes or proof of his innocence. What she found was worse than either. In a locked drawer, opened with a key she'd seen him hide, lay a bundle of letters. Her father's handwriting leapt out at her, shaky with drink and despair. "Cain, I know what you're doing. I know you mean to ruin us all. But I won't give you the satisfaction. I'll see you in hell first." And Silas's response, in his stark, controlled hand. "Monroe, the offer stands. Sell at a fair price and relocate. This doesn't have to end badly. Your family doesn't have to suffer for your pride." More letters. A documented trail of her father's descent into madness and Silas's increasingly frustrated attempts to negotiate. The final letter, dated a week before her father's death, was from Silas. "Charles, I've learned you have a daughter in school. For her sake, if not your own, accept my offer. Don't make her pay for a fight she didn't choose." Eliza's hands shook as she understood. Silas hadn't been the villain in her father's story. He'd been trying to prevent tragedy. Her father's pride, his refusal to adapt or accept help, had destroyed him. Not Silas Cain. "Find what you were looking for?" She spun to find Silas in the doorway, wearing only trousers, his expression unreadable. How long had he been watching? Words failed her. He entered the room slowly, like a man approaching a spooked horse. "You're Charles Monroe's daughter. I suspected when you arrived, but hoped. How long have you been planning this betrayal, Eliza?" I didn't." She held out the letters. "I didn't know. About these, about what really happened. Jesse said—" "Jesse Colton." His voice was flat, dead. "Of course, Matthew's nephew. Is he your lover?" "No." The denial burst from her. "No, never. He found me, told me you destroyed my father, convinced me to come here, to find evidence against you. But Silas, I swear, once I knew you, once you'd wormed your way into my bed. You mean—" The coldness in his voice shattered her. "Was any of it real, Eliza? Or was every kiss, every touch, part of your revenge?" "It was real," she whispered, tears flowing freely. "God help me, it became real. I love you." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Love? You speak of love while holding evidence of your deception?" "I was going to tell you. I swear I was." "But I was afraid." "Of what? That I'd cast you out? Divorce you?" He stepped closer, and she saw the depth of pain in his eyes. "Or were you afraid I'd prove to be the monster you came here believing I was?" "I was afraid of losing you," she said simply. "Afraid of losing this life we've built, this happiness I never expected to find. I was wrong. Silas, about everything. My father chose his own path, and I see that now. But I chose mine too, and I choose you, if you'll still have me." He stood silent for an eternity, his face a battlefield of emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. "Jesse Colton, where is he?" "The old line shack at Devil's Rock. But Silas, go to your room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I return." "You're going after him." It wasn't a question. "Silas, please. No more violence. Haven't we all bled enough?" He moved past her without answering, and she caught his arm. "If you kill him, you kill any chance we have. Please." "Be better than my father was. Be better than Jesse. Be the man I fell in love with." He looked at her then, and she saw the war in his eyes, the beast fighting with the man. Finally, he pulled free. "Lock your door. Eliza, what happens now is on my head, not yours." As he left, she sank to the floor beside his desk, surrounded by the scattered evidence of old pain and fresh betrayal. Outside, she heard horses being saddled, men being roused, and she prayed, to any god that might listen, that the man she loved would return to her whole, in body and in soul. The night stretched on, filled with waiting and regret, while somewhere in the darkness, two men carried their grievances toward a reckoning that would determine whether love could survive the weight of so much history, so much hurt. The attack came at dawn, just as the first pink light touched the eastern mountains. Eliza had spent the night at her window, watching for Silas's return, but he hadn't come back. Now she understood why. Jesse had been faster, smarter. He'd used the time to gather men, outlaws and drifters nursing grievances against the Kane Empire. The first gunshots shattered the morning stillness. From her window, Eliza saw riders pouring over the ridge. At least 15 men with guns blazing. The ranch hands scrambled for cover, returning fire from behind water troughs and fence posts. "Senora," Maria burst in. "We must get you to safety. Where's Silas?" Eliza was already pulling on her boots, her hands steadied despite the terror clawing at her chest. "He came back an hour ago, went straight to the bunkhouse. He's out there." Maria pointed toward the main corral where the fighting was fiercest. Eliza could see him now, directing the defense with cool efficiency. Even outnumbered, even caught off guard, he moved with deadly purpose, but there were too many attackers. And they had the high ground. "The women and children," Eliza said. "Get them to the root cellar, now." As Maria hurried away, Eliza made a decision that would have shocked her Boston relatives. She went to Silas's room and took the Henry rifle from above the mantelpiece, along with a box of cartridges. Her father had taught her to shoot, one of the few useful things he'd done. She made her way downstairs, staying low, through the parlor window. She could see Jake Harlan fall, clutching his shoulder. 2 of Jesse's men were advancing on the house itself. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as she fired, shattering the window. One attacker spun and dropped. The other dove for cover, cursing. Eliza levered another round, her hands remembering lessons from a lifetime ago. "What the hell are you doing?" Silas appeared beside her, dust and gunpowder streaking his face. "I told you to lock, and I told you I'm not some fragile flower." She fired again, driving back another attacker. "This is my home too." Something shifted in his eyes, surprise, respect, and something deeper. "Can you hold this position?" "Yes." "Then hold it. Don't let them reach the house." He gripped her shoulder briefly. "And, Eliza, whatever happens, know that last night, before all this, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was real." Before she could respond, he was gone, sprinting across the open ground toward the barn where several hands were pinned down. Bullets kicked up dust around him, but he moved with a gambler's faith in his own luck. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. Eliza lost count of how many times she fired, reloaded, fired again. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. Her eyes burned from powder smoke, but she held her position. Then she saw him, Jesse, mounted on a black horse, raising a rifle toward Silas's exposed back. Time slowed. Eliza swung her own rifle around, no longer thinking, only reacting. The shot was impossible. Too far, too much wind, her hands shaking now with exhaustion and fear, but she fired anyway. Jesse jerked, his shot going wild. He turned in the saddle, and even across the distance, she could see his expression when he realized who had shot him. Betrayal, rage, and strangest of all, something like satisfaction. "You choose him then," he shouted, loud enough to carry over the gunfire. "Charles Monroe's daughter chooses his killer. My father killed himself." The words tore from her throat. "With pride and stubbornness and refusal to change. Silas tried to save him." Jesse laughed, blood spreading across his shirt. "Tell yourself that, but you'll always wonder." Silas's shot cut him off. Jesse toppled from his horse, and like a puppet with cut strings, the attack faltered. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining outlaws began to retreat, firing sporadically as they fled. "Let them go," Silas commanded as some of his men moved to pursue. "See to the wounded." The sudden silence after so much noise felt unnatural. Eliza set down the rifle with trembling hands and made her way outside. The ranch yard looked like a battlefield, bodies scattered, horses milling in confusion, wounded men groaning. She found Jesse where he'd fallen, Silas kneeling beside him. Impossibly. He was still alive, though not for long. "Eliza," Jesse whispered when he saw her. "Sweet Elizabeth, your father would be ashamed. My father was a broken man who chose death over life," she said quietly. I choose differently. Jesse's eyes found Silas. You've won then. Everything. No, Silas said, his voice rough. Nobody wins in this, just different ways of losing. Jesse coughed, blood speckling his lips. Take care of her. Kane. She's stronger than she knows. His eyes glazed, fixed on the morning sky. Uncle Matt. I'll tell him. Tell him. He died without finishing, and Eliza felt tears slip down her cheeks, not for the man he'd become, but for the boy he must have been once, before bitterness poisoned him. Are you hurt? Silas asked, his hands running over her arms, checking for injuries. No, but you. She saw blood on his sleeve. Scratch. He caught her hands. Eliza, what you said about choosing. I meant it. She met his eyes steadily. I came here for revenge. Yes, but I stayed for love. I choose you, Silas Kane. I choose this life, this land, this future, if you'll have me, knowing everything. He pulled her against him, heedless of the blood and dust and watching eyes. Have you? Woman, you just fought for this ranch like a wildcat. You think I'd let you go now? Around them, the work of aftermath began. Maria emerged with medical supplies. Jake was carried to the house with a shoulder wound that would heal, and the dead were laid out with whatever dignity could be managed. It was brutal and ugly and real, the true face of frontier life. We'll bury Jesse on the hill, Silas said later, as they stood together on the porch, with the others who died today. Whatever he became, he was driven by love for his family. I can respect that. Eliza leaned into his solid warmth. Will there be more? More people seeking vengeance for old wounds? Maybe. Probably. He pressed a kiss to her hair. This land runs on blood feuds sometimes, but we'll face whatever comes, together. That evening, as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, they held a brief service for the dead. Eliza said words over Jesse's grave, forgiving him and asking forgiveness in turn. 3 of Silas's men had died defending the ranch, and their families wept as they were laid to rest. But life, stubborn and persistent, went on. The cattle still needed tending, fences needed mending, and the business of survival continued. Over the following days, something new emerged from the ashes of violence, a stronger bond between Eliza and Silas. Forged in truth and tested by fire, she took her place as true mistress of Kane Ranch, no longer a stranger playing a role, but a partner in every sense. The hands, who had watched her stand and fight, treated her with newfound respect. Even the townspeople, when word spread of her defense of the ranch, began to see her differently. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Silas said, I've been thinking about those water rights, the ones that started all this trouble. Oh? Maybe it's time to try something different. Share access. Work with the other ranchers instead of against them. Your father was too proud to accept help, but maybe others would be more practical. Eliza smiled, seeing the man continuing to emerge from the beast. I think that's wise and generous. Don't go spreading that around, he said with mock sternness. I have a reputation to maintain. She laughed, the sound carrying across the desert like a promise. Your secret's safe with me. As the stars began to emerge, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from vengeance to forgiveness, from deception to truth, from loneliness to love. The desert hadn't made her hard like she'd feared. Instead, it had burned away everything false, leaving only what was strong and true and enduring. No more secrets, she said softly. No more walls. Whatever comes, we face it honestly. Agreed. Silas pulled her closer. Though I should warn you, I may have to build a new room on the house soon. Why? He placed his hand gently on her stomach. Maria mentioned you've been feeling poorly in the mornings. In my experience with cattle, that usually means. Eliza caught her breath, her hand covering his. She hadn't been sure, hadn't wanted to hope so soon after so much violence. You think? I think the Kane legacy is secure. His voice was rough with emotion. And this time, I'll do better. Be better. For you. For our child. for this land that asks so much of us. As if in benediction, a cool breeze swept across the desert, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of rain. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, no longer a lonely sound, but a celebration of survival against all odds. And in the shelter of Silas's arms, Eliza felt the last of her ghosts slip away, leaving room for the future they would build together on this unforgiving, beautiful land. The town of Perdition had never seen anything like it. Word of the attack on Kane Ranch had spread like wildfire, and with it came whispers about the true identity of Silas Kane's wife. By the time Eliza accompanied Silas to town for supplies 2 weeks later, the atmosphere was thick with judgment and speculation. "That's her," she heard a woman hiss as they passed the general store. "Charles Munro's daughter, turned against her own blood." "Shameless," another replied, "taking up with the very man who ruined her family." Eliza kept her chin high, her hand steady on Silas's arm, but each word struck like a physical blow. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Patterson, the judge's wife, deliberately turned her back when Eliza entered. Other women followed suit, creating a wall of righteous indignation. "I'll wait outside," Eliza murmured, but Silas's hand covered hers, holding her in place. "You'll shop for what we need," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the store. "This is our town, too." Mr. Henley, the proprietor, shifted nervously behind his counter. "Mr. Kane, perhaps it would be better." "Better?" Silas's tone could have frozen water in July. "Better if my wife skulked in shadows because of small-minded gossip." "It ain't gossip if it's true." Tom Garrett's widow spat from near the fabric bolts. "She came here under false pretenses, married you while plotting with that Colton boy, and now my Tom's dead because of it." "Your husband died because he chose to steal cattle," Silas said coldly. "His choices, his consequences. Like Charles Munro's choices?" "Mrs." Garrett's eyes glittered with malice. "How many men have you destroyed? Kane, how many families ruined for your empire?" The store had gone dead silent. Eliza felt Silas tense beside her, the beast stirring beneath his controlled surface. Before he could respond, she stepped forward. "You're right," she said quietly. "I did come here under false pretenses. I believed my father was murdered by greed and cruelty. I came seeking justice for a good man wronged." She paused, meeting the eyes of her accusers. "I was wrong. My father was a proud, stubborn man who chose death over adaptation." Silas offered him fair terms, tried to help him transition to cattle ranching, but my father would rather die than change. "You defend him?" "Mrs." Patterson found her voice. "Your father's killer." "I defend the truth," Eliza replied, "which is more than anyone in this store seems interested in. Yes, I was wrong. Yes, I've made terrible choices, but I won't compound those mistakes by perpetuating lies." "Lies?" Tom Garrett's widow laughed bitterly. "The only lies here are the ones you tell yourself to sleep at night beside that—" "Enough." Silas's voice cracked like a whip. "You want someone to blame for your sorrows? Blame me. Every death, every loss, every hard choice. Lay them at my feet. But my wife has proven her loyalty with blood. She stood against men who would have burned our home, shot Jessie Colton herself to save my life. What more would you have her do? Leave," someone muttered from the back. "Both of you. This town got along fine before the Kane Ranch grew so big. Maybe it's time—" "Time for what?" Silas stepped forward, and the crowd instinctively moved back. "Time to forget who built the roads you use, who brought the railroad spur that keeps this town alive, who employs half your husbands and sons. Built on blood." "Mrs." Garrett insisted. "All of it." "Yes," Silas agreed, surprising everyone. "Built on blood, mine and others. This land demands blood payment, always has. The question is whether we keep spilling it over old grievances or finally learn to move forward." Eliza watched her husband with new eyes. This wasn't the cold autocrat she'd first met, nor the tender lover she'd discovered. This was a man wrestling with his own nature, trying to find balance between strength and mercy. "I have a proposal," she said suddenly. "The water rights that have caused so much strife, what if we shared them? Created a water cooperative for all the ranches and farms. Everyone contributes to maintenance. Everyone benefits from access. Shocked silence greeted her words. Silas turned to study her, something unreadable in his gray eyes. That's impossible, Henley stuttered. The legal complications alone. I know a judge, Eliza said dryly, glancing at Mrs. Patterson. If he's willing to help draft fair agreements, unless, of course, the town prefers to continue this cycle of vengeance and retaliation. You'd do that? A younger woman stepped forward. Martha Sullivan, whose husband worked at Kane Ranch. Share water that legally belongs to your husband. Water belongs to the land. Eliza said, We're all just temporary guardians. My father forgot that. Nearly everyone in this story forgot that. Too busy fighting over ownership to remember stewardship. Silas cleared his throat. My wife speaks wisdom I'm still learning. But she's right. The water cooperative could work, with proper management. Any ranch willing to contribute labor and funds for maintenance gets equal access. The mood in the store shifted, hostility giving way to wary consideration. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time. But it was a beginning. We'll need to think on it, Henley said finally. Discuss it with the other ranchers. Do that, Silas nodded. In the meantime, my wife and I have shopping to complete. Unless anyone else wants to air grievances? No one did, though the looks Eliza received ranged from curious to hostile as she selected her purchases. When they finally left, arms full of packages, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That was brave, Silas said as he helped her into the wagon. Foolish, maybe, but brave. Did you mean it? About the water cooperative? He was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses onto the main road. Would you think less of me if I said it goes against every instinct I have? No, I'd think you were being honest. Then honestly, the thought of sharing what I fought to build makes me want to snarl like a wolf. But, he glanced at her, and she saw the struggle in his face. But I've learned that holding too tight can cost more than letting go. If sharing water rights brings peace, lets our children grow up without blood feuds, then perhaps it's worth it. Our children, Eliza repeated softly, hand moving to her still flat stomach. I want them to inherit more than an empire built on graves. Silas said, You've shown me that's possible, even if it means going against my nature. They rode in companionable silence until they reached the ranch. As Silas helped her down from the wagon, Jake Harlan approached, his arm still in a sling from the battle. Boss, we got visitors, Judge Patterson and some of the other ranchers. They're waiting in your study. Silas and Eliza exchanged glances. Word travels fast, she murmured. In this country, good news travels slow and bad news rides a fast horse. Silas replied, Let's see which one this is. The meeting went late into the evening. Eliza sat beside Silas as they negotiated with men who'd been enemies days before, working out the details of something unprecedented, cooperation instead of competition. This ain't how it's done, Bill Morrison complained at one point. Every man for himself. That's the code out here. The code's left us with a cemetery full of every man for himself, Judge Patterson observed. Maybe it's time for a new code. It wasn't easy. There were heated arguments, moments when Eliza thought violence might erupt in the very study. But gradually, painfully, an agreement took shape. The Perdition Water Cooperative. Equal access for equal contribution. Disputes settled by committee rather than gunfire. When the last rancher had left, Silas slumped in his chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. I feel like I've been breaking horses all day. You have, in a way, Eliza said, pouring him a whiskey. Breaking old habits, old patterns. He caught her hand, pulling her onto his lap. This is your doing, this change. I'd have gone on as I was, building my empire on fear and force, until someone finally put a bullet in me. You're stronger than that empire-building beast, she said, tracing the lines of his face. I've seen it. The man who reads poetry, who spared those boys, who just spent hours finding common ground with enemies. That man exists because of you. He buried his face in her neck, breathing deep. God, Eliza, when I think how close I came to losing you, to never knowing this—" She held him close, feeling the tremors that ran through his strong frame. "But you didn't lose me. We didn't lose each other. And now we build something new." The next morning brought another test. As Eliza supervised the household, preparing for the increased social obligations that would come with the cooperative, Maria approached hesitantly. "Senora, there is a woman at the back door. She says she is family to you." Eliza's heart stopped. "Family?" She hurried to the kitchen, where a travel-worn woman in her 30s waited, despite the years and hardship etched on her face. Eliza recognized her immediately. "Catherine?" she breathed. "My God, is it really you?" Her sister's embrace was fierce, desperate. "Lizzie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't come sooner. Couldn't help when Father... But I heard what happened here. Heard you married Cain. I had to see for myself if you were all right." They talked for hours, tears and recriminations giving way to understanding. Catherine had married a farmer in Colorado, struggling to survive while carrying guilt over abandoning the family. She'd come as soon as word of the Cain Ranch battle reached her, fearing the worst. "And now?" Catherine asked as afternoon shadows grew long. "Now that you know the truth about Father, about everything, do you regret it?" Eliza thought of Silas, somewhere out on the range, working alongside men who'd once been enemies. She thought of the child growing within her, the future they were building together. "I regret the pain," she said finally. "The deception, the violence. But if it hadn't happened exactly as it did, I wouldn't be here, wouldn't have him. And despite everything, I can't regret that." Catherine stayed for dinner, watching with wonder as Silas treated Eliza with obvious devotion, as the household ran with smooth efficiency under her sister's guidance. When she left the next morning, promising to return for the birth, her parting words were, "Father would be scandalized, but I think Mother would understand. She always said the heart finds its own way." That evening, as Eliza stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant hues, Silas joined her, pulling her back against his chest. "No more ghosts?" he asked softly. "No more ghosts," she confirmed. "Only the future." He turned her in his arms, kissing her deeply as the first stars appeared. Around them, the ranch settled into evening routines, cattle lowing, horses nickering, the comfortable sounds of home. It wasn't the life she'd imagined as a young woman in Boston. It was harder, stranger, more complex than any fairy tale, but it was real, and it was theirs. 3 years later, the Arizona Territory welcomed the Cain family with open arms and endless sky. The new ranch sat nestled in a valley where the San Pedro River still ran true, its cottonwoods offering blessed shade in the heat of summer. It was smaller than the empire they'd left behind in New Mexico, but it was theirs alone, built on hope rather than conquest. And Eliza stood on the porch of their adobe house, watching 2-year-old Sarah toddle after a patient old ranch dog. Her daughter had Silas's gray eyes, but her mother's determined chin, a combination that promised interesting times ahead. In the near distance, she could see Silas working with a young Mustang, his movements patient and gentle, so different from the man she'd first met. "Mama, doggy," Sarah squealed, wrapping chubby arms around the tolerant animal's neck. "Gentle, sweetheart," Eliza cautioned, though she knew Buck would sooner die than harm the child. The old dog had appointed himself Sarah's guardian from the day they'd brought her home. The sound of a wagon approaching drew her attention. Catherine climbed down, her monthly visit as regular as the phases of the moon. Behind her, her own children, twin boys of 4, immediately raced off to explore. "You look well," Catherine observed, embracing her sister. "Ranch life agrees with you." "It does." Eliza smiled, pouring cool tea from the pitcher she kept ready. "Though I never imagined I'd be teaching myself beekeeping." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play. The beehives Silas had helped her establish hummed contentedly in the distance, their honey already becoming known in the nearby town of Benson. Any word from New Mexico? Catherine asked carefully. Jake writes regularly. The water cooperative is thriving. 3 new families have settled in Perdition, drawn by the promise of shared resources. Eliza's smile turned wistful. He says they've put up a statue in the town square, not of Silas, thank God, but a monument to cooperation. Can you imagine? And no one's tried to claim the Kane Ranch? We sold it to the cooperative before we left. Silas insisted on fair terms. Enough to start fresh here, but not enough to beggar anyone. She laughed softly. You should have seen their faces when he announced it. I think Tom Garrett's widow nearly fainted. Silas approached, lifting Sarah onto his shoulders as she shrieked with delight. The years had softened him, not weakened, but gentled, like leather worked until it was supple. He kissed Eliza's cheek, a casual intimacy that still made her heart skip. Catherine, he greeted warmly. Will you stay for supper? We're trying a new recipe with the honey, glazed ham that Eliza insists will revolutionize dining. Mock if you will, Eliza said primly. But Mr. Thompson at the hotel has already asked to buy our entire honey harvest. As Catherine helped prepare the meal, sharing gossip from her own small farm, Eliza found herself marveling at the life they'd built. It hadn't been without struggles. Starting over never was. There'd been nights when Silas woke in cold sweats, the old wounds aching. Days when Eliza found herself looking over her shoulder, waiting for past ghosts to materialize. But gradually, they'd found their rhythm. Silas ran cattle on a smaller scale, focusing on quality bloodlines rather than quantity. Eliza managed the household and her growing honey business, finding unexpected joy in the precise world of beekeeping. They'd even taken in 2 Apache orphans the previous winter, boys who now worked the ranch and attended the mission school. Papa story, Sarah demanded as they finished dinner, her favorite request. Which one, little bee? Silas asked, though they all knew which one she'd choose. Desert flower. It was her favorite, a tale Silas had crafted about a brave flower that bloomed in the desert despite the heat and drought, growing stronger and more beautiful through hardship. Eliza knew it was their story, transformed into something magical for young ears. After the children were abed, the adults sat on the porch, watching purple twilight settle over the valley. Catherine's husband, John, had arrived to collect his family, and the men discussed horse breeding while the sisters enjoyed the cooling air. I have news, Catherine said quietly. I've had a letter from Aunt Margaret in Boston. She's heard of your success here, wants to visit. Eliza nearly choked on her tea. Margaret, the same woman who sent me into exile as a mail-order bride. The very same. Apparently, she's quite proud of how you've civilized that savage Mr. Kane. Catherine's eyes danced with mischief. Shall I write back that you're too busy civilizing to receive visitors? Actually, Silas interjected, having overheard, invite her. I'd like to meet the woman whose meddling gave me everything. Later, after their guests had departed, Eliza and Silas walked hand in hand to the small rise behind the house. It had become their evening ritual, this moment of quiet communion as the stars emerged. Any regrets? Silas asked, as he did sometimes when the mood struck him. Only one, Eliza said, causing him to tense. I regret it took tragedy and deception to bring us together. I wish we could have found each other honestly from the beginning. He relaxed, pulling her close. Without the fire, we might never have recognized what we could be together. Sometimes the hardest roads lead to the sweetest destinations. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The sound that had once seemed so lonely now felt like home, wild things calling to their mates under an endless sky. I've been thinking, Silas said, about expanding. Not the ranch, the honey operation. Maybe teach other families. Create another cooperative. What do you think? Eliza smiled against his chest. I think you're becoming dangerously progressive in your old age. Mr. Kane. Your influence, Mrs. Kane. He tilted her chin up for a kiss that still, after 3 years, made her knees weak. You've turned a beast into something almost respectable. Almost? She laughed. I'll have to work harder. As they walked back to the house, Eliza caught sight of their reflection in the window, a couple shaped by hardship but not broken by it, standing together against whatever the desert might bring. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully, dreaming perhaps of desert flowers and patient dogs. Soon, God willing, there would be another child to fill the rooms with laughter. "Silas?" she said as they prepared for bed. I've been thinking about writing it down. Our story. All of it. The ugly parts and the beautiful ones. Do you think anyone would want to read such a thing? He considered this, his hands gentle as he unpinned her hair. "I think," he said slowly, "that everyone who's ever loved someone they shouldn't, everyone who's ever had to choose between vengeance and forgiveness, might find something in it. Write it. Eliza. Tell them how love can bloom even in the harshest ground." So she did. By lamplight, in the quiet hours while her family slept, Eliza Kane wrote their story. She wrote of pride and prejudice, of wounds and healing, of a beast tamed not by beauty, but by truth. She wrote of the desert that had tested them and the love that had transformed them. And when she reached the end, she wrote, "In this land of extremes, where the sun burns away all pretense and the night reveals truth in its stars, we found each other, not as we'd imagined we should be, but as we truly were, flawed, fierce, and ultimately, forever. Outside, the desert bloomed with a secret life, waiting for the next rain to reveal its hidden treasures. And in their bed, Silas pulled Eliza close, murmuring words of love that only she would hear. The beast and the bride, transformed by their journey into something neither had dared to dream. Partners, lovers, and living proof that even the hardest hearts could learn to bend without breaking. In the morning, there would be work, cattle to tend, honey to harvest, children to raise. But tonight, there was only this, the quiet breathing of their daughter down the hall, the distant call of wild things, and the knowledge that they had traveled through fire and emerged not unscathed, but unafraid. Home, Eliza thought as sleep claimed her. After all the miles and mistakes, they had finally come home. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed following Silas and Eliza's journey from vengeance to love. Where are you listening to this story? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with fellow lovers of Western romance. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this story. Did you believe in Eliza's transformation? Could you forgive like Silas did? Let me know what touched your heart in this tale of redemption under the desert stars.